even in the best executive space, because they don't really know what they're doing. Well, Senator Sanders and Senator Boxer are now pushing legislation that would outlaw bankers from sitting on the board of directors at the Federal Reserve's 12 regional banks, which now, as of Dodd-Frank, has direct supervision of those banks. This bill would be a step to end the conflict of interest that has regulators and financial institutions really all run by the exact same people, all using our money, not theirs. Senator Sanders joins us now from the Capitol. Senator, you called this a clear example of the fox guarding the hen house. Did it make sense before we get into this? Is obviously outrageous. It's absurd. It's probably the adjectives all day. Did it make sense 100 years ago? In other words, is this a matter of times have changed, world has changed, or did it never make sense, or does it even matter?
Well, I'm not a historian of financial matters, but I doubt that it ever made sense. It certainly doesn't make sense right now. The idea that the gentleman, in this case, Mr. Diamond, who is head of the largest bank in the United States of America, sits on the board, the regional federal New York board, that regulates banks in that area is totally absurd. As you've indicated, 6 out of the 9 members of the board are appointed by the banking industry, and that also makes no sense at all. So we've got to end the obvious conflicts of interest. We have to get people who are beholden to the financial institutions off of the regional feds, and that's what our amendment does.
And what do you think your political prospects are with this?
Well, I'll tell you the truth. I mean, I think if you ask the American people, do you think you should have bankers on the board that regulates the banking industry, I suspect 90% of the people would say, are you crazy? Of course you shouldn't. On the other hand, Wall Street is enormously powerful, and we'll see how well we'll do. I think the key point here, Dylan, is that 4 years ago, Wall Street drove this country into a horrendous recession through their greed, their recklessness, and their illegal behavior. Most Americans understand that they need to be regulated. In my view, the big banks need to be broken up. But the idea that regional feds throughout this country are dominated by the banking industry itself is totally crazy. That has got to change.
At the same time, if you look at a lot of the rationale behind Dodd-Frank, which was the Democrats and the president's financial reform bill, much of that legislation was actually designed to give the Federal Reserve more power, not less power. The argument was that the legislature doesn't understand the financial markets. You don't want a bunch of crazy senators and Congress people. You ever want to have a vote like the one you had on the TARP? Well, we'll never do that again. If you pass Dodd-Frank, I can give you direct supervision of the Federal Reserve. Does not resolving this conflict go hand in? If you're going to make the Federal Reserve the regulator, you're going to bypass Congress. You're going to say this is all ours. Doesn't that raise the stakes for conflict of interest at the Federal Reserve?
Absolutely. I mean, to me, this is a no-brainer. This is laughable. Nobody thinks that the fox should be guarding the hen house. And I'll tell you something else, and I believe this very, very strongly. And you have been doing a good job on this issue, Dylan. Unless we get a handle on Wall Street, unless we end Wall Street as a gambling casino where huge sums of money are at risk in just very complicated bets, unless we demand that the financial institutions in this country invest in the productive economy, provide affordable loans to businesses who are producing goods and services and creating jobs, unless we do that, I have serious doubts about the future of our economy.
And ultimately, I would argue that that is precisely what will happen. In other words, what happens between now and when we go back to a financial system that is predicated on capital requirements, a culture of investment, a culture of opportunity seeking, which is in any nation, it'll only exist if it has that.
It's what we call, Dylan, it's what we call boring banking. Boring banking, where banks are not engaged in complicated bets, but they actually invest in communities around this country, help small and medium-sized businesses get the loans they need to create the jobs this country desperately needs. That's old-fashioned, boring banking. It's not a gambling casino. And in my view, that's where we should be headed.
And the greatest, and I would argue that 90% of the people in this country, given the opportunity to walk through this over in a bar or at a kitchen table or a breakfast table, there's almost no room for dispute once you understand the mechanics. However, the final defense that you obviously have a hard time coming over, whether it's journalistically or politically, is, well, Senator or whoever you may be, you simply do not understand the complexities of modern finance, Senator. You're from a different era. You're a simple man. You don't comprehend these things that we've devised and their complexities. And as a result, we could never allow somebody else to supervise these complexities because no one else understands them, and we would never want to have somebody who doesn't know what they're doing in the room, Senator.
Dylan, you may recall that is pretty much what Alan Greenspan said at a Fed meeting. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
That's exactly what he said. This is just much too complicated. Well, you know what is not too complicated for the American people and for the average United States Senator? Small and medium-sized businesses need affordable loans so we can invest in our economy, expand, and create jobs. That's not too complicated. What is complicated is what led us into this horrendous recession we're in right now. Trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of derivatives, enormously complicated procedures that, in fact, very few people do own. So I think we, in fact, got to make the system a lot less complicated, get money into Main Street, help our business community create jobs, put people to work.
And I think you honestly speak beyond all political identities when you say that, Senator. I certainly, in the past 3 years and a couple of road shows and writing a book, and I've yet to meet a person in this country who doesn't agree with what you just said. So you certainly.